Okay, awesome. Well, we have a very special episode this week. Actually, we have a couple interesting developments. Well, first is we actually decided to name this ongoing content series. We're going to be calling it Technically Human. I'm sure you guys have seen by the intro and, all the new branding and stuff. So hopefully that's fun and exciting for everybody. It was a fun process for us as well. And not only that, we have a very special guest this week. We have Amanda Sabreah, who is the CEO and founder of Staat. So, Amanda, I'd love for you to introduce yourself, and then we can dive right in.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. My name is Amanda Sabreah. I'm the founder of Staat. This is the second company that I've founded, and I am former product and marketing in the agency world and at larger companies like Coca-Cola.
Cool. So, yeah, to everyone who's been listening and following along, obviously we're both the co-founders of Stat. We all have a third one as well, Paul, who's our CTO. He's doing his coding work right now, so we don't want to bother him. But today we wanted to actually bring you guys into kind of the process and some of the most interesting things that we've uncovered while building Stat. And a lot of the build out of Stat was really talking to our customers or our future customers, which are engineering and product managers. So this week we wanted to kind of tell you guys what we found to be most interesting, or not what we thought it would be. So Amanda, I'd love for you to get us going, kick us off here.
Yeah, for sure. So I would say the most surprising thing that I've learned about engineering management is that when I was in the swing of things, I always thought that me doing each project a little bit differently and managing it a little bit differently was because I was non-technical. And so I was like, okay, maybe I feel like I know what I'm doing, but maybe I don't. And I think it was surprising to hear. I think every single engineering manager that we've talked to, which is probably a little bit over 100 or so now, everybody's doing it a little bit differently. And so you have these like agile manifestos and, Scrum, Kanban, all of these different sort of high overarching processes, if you will, but everybody's doing it differently within those processes. And so it's really interesting to just get a tab on, what's right, what's not right. It's just really unique to the project.
And yeah, I think that's a really interesting point because, it's like when we talk about development, we often talk about the languages. We always say, what language are you fluent in? And it's interesting because when developers transition from an individual contributor, code all day, to manager, their language has to change. You speak a completely new language. You're now speaking the language of business, which gets further complicated when you add on top of it like processes like agile or force fitting agile into a waterfall culture, like whatever we've seen, right? So what do you think like is the result of people having to basically figure it out every time they are doing something new? Like what's the implications of that, or what have we seen so far?
I mean, I think the implications are it's really hard to get and improve a result that you want, right? And so I think people nowadays are really focused on performance and improving efficiency and, can we get faster velocity and all of this? And in theory, yes, all of that's nice, right? But each project is a little bit different. And so it's really hard to sort of get a baseline, even as an engineering manager, of how am I going to improve the performance of my team. And so that's been, an interesting result of just everybody doing it differently and sort of trying to find their own process or their own language to live by.
Yeah, it's so interesting to be in this world because like, at the end of the day, it's like, I think it's something of a spectrum. Like there's a lot of standardization in the development world. Like people do things a certain way, code is written a certain way, but at the same time, it's pretty flexible. People figure things out. And that's very true of management as well. Like I was on Twitter the other day following, I'm sure you follow him. He's an engineering manager at Netflix, Ryan Burgess. But he was saying like, he had a video. It was like, should engineering managers code? And his answer was no. And like that's a pretty, I would say, sensitive topic, right? Because his whole point was you can't have one foot in the door and one foot out the door. You have to be completely focused. And that goes back to like having to figure it out. And for me, what I've noticed is like this lack of quote unquote standardization, which I think is it's a good thing. It allows for innovation, allows people to figure it out, it allows cultures to develop and stuff. But at the same time, what I've noticed is how much of the friction in engineering management is so much of a people problem versus a technology problem. And I think technology has something to do with it, which is why we're building Stat, obviously. But at the end of the day, it's like what I'm seeing. I had like an hour long Twitter conversation with
One
this
quarter conversation.
with this one lady who used to be a developer. She's now a consultant. She was just telling me basically like, wow, I had such a bad experience with my managers in my previous jobs. Like they just didn't know what to do, or they didn't know what they were doing, or they had their own motives that had nothing to do with me. And you hear this kind of thing over and over again. It's like, why, I think that's something I want to talk about. Why is there such a lack of training for managers? Like to me, I like the way I see it is like people like I was looking at the stats the other day. I think it was something like close to 40,000 people went to coding boot camp in 2019. And then I started to look up, so what do engineering managers do? There's no engineering manager boot camp. There's not even any numbers around how many people actually take it so seriously. Like it's so serious that I'm gonna invest money in it, or I'm gonna take 6 months of my career. I'm gonna pause my career for 6 months to do it. Like to me, it's almost that much of a skill. But why isn't it seen that in that way in the industry?
Well, I think, again, back to standardization, maybe now we're getting off into like what's tangible, right? And people management is one of the hardest skills to master. And it's not very tangible, right? It's
No.
like, you don't really know if you're a great people manager. I mean, unless someone is singing your praises. And so I think that middle management all around is just, it's not seen as, you know, I'm going to say sexy, even though I hate that word, but a lot of times things that we think are sexy is what gets invested into,
Mm,
right? And so developers, they are almost like the new athletes, right? But I kind of view managers as, well, these are the coaches of the athletes, right? And then the directors are the GMs, and then VPs, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm right along with you, is that coaches have to spend years coaching teams in order to get better and become a great coach. But the best
yeah.
coaches out there, they find their own system, they create their own system, they learn how to work with people in their own way, they learn how to work with a lot of different people. And so sort of, I'm going to go to basketball here, but like Phil Jackson, right, one of the greatest coaches of all time, Greg Popovich, they all sort of, they found their steez, if you will, as a manager, right? Coach, manager, and then brought. And I think it's interesting because with them, they're great people managers, but they're also great strategists. And I think that's another thing that's maybe goes unseen in the engineering management world, is engineering managers have to be just as much strategist as they do people managers. And I think that gets lost and sometimes underappreciated.
Yeah, that's so true. And it's like that's truly a skill. And you really
Yeah.
can't like, you really can't just I think the issue is it's like the work of management. I think people assume it's inherent or innate to most people. Like
Right.
because the practice of management seems obvious, like do one-on-ones, take care of your people, blah 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 blah. Like
Right.
everyone can list off the actions, but there's a lot more to actually enabling that in an organization, because the truth is, you're right, middle management is unsexy because you're stuck between layers of politics,
Right.
bureaucracy, and decision making, and that's the work. Like I remember at my last job, my manager was fantastic at my last job. He was so good at like doing that. Like, and he was, having basically the work is, do I care enough about this person to
Right.
have potentially uncomfortable conversations up and down the organization so that this person can succeed,
Right.
right?
Right.
And that takes the job of a strategist. When do I talk to whom? How do I talk to whom? Like
Exactly.
all these types of things. It's like so much timing. It's so, a lot of it's just, I don't want to say softer work, but it is much more, it requires a lot of empathy. It requires a lot of self-awareness.
And I think that's a great point that you make around like self-awareness. It requires a lot of awareness all around,
Mm,
right? Self-awareness, people awareness, project awareness, if you will, a stakeholder awareness, customer awareness. And like you said, a lot of people name off the obvious things, but there's so much else to it. And you know me, like I have this saying is if you can't find a way to care about a person that you don't know yet, like if you don't know how to have a conversation and find a reason to care about them, you shouldn't be a manager. You shouldn't be a
mm,
leader. You have to care enough. And I think a lot of people say show empathy. Um, you should be, empathetic and vulnerable. And I think that takes work, right? That takes work. That's a muscle that you have to work on is I can't just walk to you and then have empathy for you and vulnerability for you. I don't know you, right? I have to work to find something that I care about in you. And so again, that's back to the self-awareness, but that's also back to training, right? I think a lot of that gets missed on a lot of people. I can tell you, you know what, have empathy for everyone that you hire, on your stat team. But that doesn't mean you're going to do it. That doesn't even mean you know how to do it. So I think that is a muscle within itself. So again, back to the awareness. I think you bring up a great topic, which could be a whole nother show. But self-awareness, project awareness, people awareness, it all counts. It all goes into management.
yeah, and like I think it's so interesting because we obviously have an amazing customer advisory board full of empathetic, awesome engineering managers,
Oh, yeah.
and we obviously want to speak to them. We've been speaking to them about potential topics they want to talk about. So much of it is like one-on-ones, how to
Mm-hmm.
give feedback. Like,
Mm-hmm.
why are top engineering managers the things that they want to talk about? These one-on-one interpersonal things is
Right.
because that is the hardest part of the job.
Right.
But I think the biggest question, at least for me, is like, jumping into these new roles, or if I were to, if I could even give any advice, it would be, are you assuming you're good at this?
Mm.
Right? I think it's like, it's
Mm.
all about a posture. And, I don't think anybody would assume, like, if you're learning a new language, like if you're learning, I don't know, Python or SQL or something for the first time, you would never assume you're good at it.
Right.
And I think it's taking that same posture of, if I'm new to management, or if I'm new to management on this team or at this size of company or whatever, I think it's taking that posture. Like, obviously you have, most people have a lot of competence, but at the
Right.
same time, I think there's a level of awareness, but also humility that is required to do the job of people management, which that is probably the hardest thing to teach, right? Or even
Right.
to get across to anybody.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So yeah, no, I think this is a great topic that we should probably, keep unpacking further
Yeah,
episodes.
definitely. Would love to.
Anything else stand out to you
No, I
recently?
think, I mean, in terms of advice, leaving advice, and I would say, you know, posturing is a great one. I would also give advice to the people around managers, right? Because like you said, it's you shouldn't we can't assume that someone's going to be a good manager because they were good at the skill of the person that they're managing. It's a completely different skill. It's a completely different muscle. It makes it easier for me to be aware of what you're going through because we have a skill in common, but that does not make me a good manager. And so I think that we have to prepare our managers a little bit more. We've got to tool them a little bit better. We've got to get the training to them a little bit more. And then on the flip side, towards developers, it's like, or direct reports, I should say, and not just developers. It's like everybody knows what it feels like to have a horrible manager, right? Everybody does. But it's like sometimes if you could have empathy back to your manager, and I know that sometimes that feels hard to do because you feel like they may be attacking you or they may be playing against you, but a lot of times it's just because they don't have someone in their ear that's saying actually you should handle this in a different way. So
That's so
that
true.
would be my two things is you know having empathy both ways, but then also just not assuming that you're a good manager because, you're good at the skill of the person you're managing.
That's great. I think you bring up such an interesting point, because it's like an inaction from the standpoint of an individual contributor probably just means that the product won't be built as fast. Right? That's the effect of inaction on an IC. The effect of inaction from a manager feels way worse.
Right.
Like the implications are much broader. It feels like they don't care. They're actively, holding you back in your career and stuff like that. And so I think that's something also to think about. It's just like the effect size of, the types of roles that these people take on that our customers are in. So I think that like empathy back is a really interesting, solid idea. Yeah.
For sure. And I think you're right. I also would say that, an inaction of an IC, it can have longer sort of horizontal effects. It can have vertical effects, whatever. I think the inaction of a manager feels so personal, right? It feels so personal because you're the one at the end of the day that has to recommend me to move forward in my career, right? And so I think that, going down this road, even with us unpacking this, talking about it more, pulling more people into the conversation, it's only going to help, because at the end of the day, we should be helping people achieve their life's work. That's my whole big thing. Mm-hmm. And as a manager, that's a big responsibility of the job. And so I love this conversation. I love this topic. So yes, I'm happy to unpack it more and more.
That's a great point. There's a general sense from most managers. It's like, it's kind of scary to ask the questions because you implicitly suggest that you don't know what you're doing. But I think that actually is the job.
Right.
Right.
Right. Right. And I even wrote a post, and I don't know if it published yet or not. And it's just about how you can show up and create your own vision as a manager. And a lot of it is centered around like, just simply ask the question. Like, if you don't know, just simply ask. It creates a two-way trust. It helps your team be able to learn how to ask questions back to you. But I think a lot of people, like you said, they're scared to ask because it implies they don't know. Mm-hmm. When sometimes asking is the most powerful thing that you can do.
That's right. Yeah. No, this has been great. How lovely to have you on as our very special guest.
Yes.
We'll have you on plenty more. So thank you all listeners for tuning in. Please let us know in the comments or hit us up at hello@stat.co. If you have any suggestions for future episodes or questions you want to ask us, we are super open. You can also catch us in our DMs on Twitter or LinkedIn at Amanda Sabreah, at David Calcho, across those platforms. So thank y'all. Hope you enjoyed. This was fun for us. Peace.